Good afternoon, listeners. This is DJ Maurice.
And this is DJ Angel.
And you are now listening to Besties at 13.1, your besties for life.
I wonder what is for today's episode.
Well, have you ever been accused?
What? Accuse me? No, why?
Accused of murder?
Oh, hold on. You are being creepy, bestie. What is the connection of your questions to my question?
Chill, bestie. I am just asking. So,
Of course not. Well, is killing an insect a murder?
you're so silly, bestie.
So what is the connection of all your questions to today's episode?
Well, our episode for today is about mystery.
The kitchen is now abandoned farmhouse of John Wright. A gloomy kitchen and left without having put in order. Unwashed pans under the sink, a loaf of bread outside the bread box, a dish towel on the table, other signs of incompleted work. The sheriff comes in, followed by the county attorney and Hale. All are much bundled up and go at once to the stove. They are followed by the two women. The sheriff's wife first. She is a slight, weary woman, a teen, nervous face. Mrs. Hale is larger and would ordinarily be called more comfortable looking. But she is disturbed now and looks fearfully about as she enters. The women have come in slowly and stand close together near the door.
Oh, this feels good. Come up to the fire, ladies. I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we move things about, you explain to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning.
By the way, has anything been moved? Are things just as you left them yesterday?
It's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out of this morning to make a fire for us. But I told him not to touch anything except the stove.
Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday, when I have to send Frank to Morris Center for that man who went crazy, I want you to know that I had my hands full yesterday. I knew you could get back from Omaha by today, and as long as I went over everything here myself.
Well, Mr. Hale, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door and still it was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. So I knocked again and I thought I heard somebody say, "Come in." I wasn't sure, but I opened the door. This door. And there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of plaiting it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked queer, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next, and kind of done up.
How did she seem to feel about your coming?
Why, I don't think she minded. I said, "How do, Mrs. Wright? It's cold, ain't it?" And she said, "Is it?" And went on, kind of plaiting at her apron. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove or sit down, but just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, "I want to see John," and then she laughed. I guess you would call it a laugh. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," she says, kinda dull-like. "Ain't he home?" Says I. "Yes," says she, "he's home." "Then why can't I see him?" I ask her, out of patience. "'Cause he's dead," says she. "Dead?" says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited. But rocking back and forth. Why? What did he die of? He died of a rope around his neck, says she, and just went on pleating at her apron. I went out and called Harry. I thought I might need help. We went upstairs and there he was lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs where you can point it all out. Just go on with the rest of the story.
My first thought was to get that rope off. It looked but Harry, he went up to him and he said, "No, he's dead, alright, and we'd better not touch anything." So we went back downstairs. She was still sitting that same way. "Has nobody been notified?" I asked. "No," says she, unconcerned. "Who did this, Miss Wright?" said Harry. "I don't know," she says. "You don't know? Weren't you sleeping in bed with him?" says Harry. "Yes, but I was on the inside." "Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him, and you didn't wake up?" says Harry. "I didn't wake up," she said after him. Harry was going to ask her more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell the story first to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could to River's place, where there's telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you had gone for the coroner?
She moved from that chair to this one over here and just sat there with her hands held together and looking down. I got a feeling that I ought to make some conversation, so I said I had come to see if John wanted to put in a telephone. And at that, she started to laugh, and then she stopped and looked at me. Scared. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't scared. I wouldn't like to say it was. Soon, Harry got back and then Dr. Lloyd came. And you, Mr. Peters. And so, I guess that's all I know that you don't.
Time check, it's already 2:45 p.m. and this is brought to you by Besties at 30.1, your besties for life.
So, that is for the first part of our story.
Okay, bestie, I'm shocked with what I heard.
Well, I'm sure our listeners were shocked too. Am I right, listeners?
Right.
So, besties, let's now continue the story.
I guess we'll go upstairs first and then out to the barn and around there. You're convinced that there was nothing important here? Nothing that would point to any motive?
Nothing here but kitchen things.
Oh, here's a nice mess!
Oh, her fruit. It did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire'd go out and her jars would break.
Well, can you beat the woman held for murder and worrying about her preserves?
I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, for all the worries, what would you do without the ladies? Dirty towels? Not much of housekeeper, would you say, ladies?
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Ah, loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends too.
I've not seen much of her late years. I've not been in this house. It's more than a year.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
I like her all well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full. Mr. Henderson, and then...
Yes?
It never seemed a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had a home-working instinct.
Well, I don't know what Wright had either.
You mean that they didn't get on very well?
No, I don't mean anything. But I don't think a place be any cheerfuler for John's Wright being in it.
I'd like to talk more of that little later. I want to get the lay of things upstairs now.
I suppose anything Mrs. Peters does will be alright. She was to take in some clothes for her, you know, and a few little things. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, but I would like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson.
I hate to have men coming into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than their duty.
Duty's alright, but I guess that deputy sheriff that came out to make the farm might have got a little of his own. Wish I'd thought of that sooner. Seems mean to talk about her for not having things leak up when she had to come away in such a hurry.
She had bread set.
She was going to put this in there. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some here that's alright, Mrs. Peters. Yes, here. This is cherries too. I declare I believe that's the only one. She feel awful bad after all her hard work in the hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You could help me carry them. My, it's cold in there.
Right was close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the ladies' aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part, and then you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. But that was 30 years ago. This is all you was to take in?
She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail. But I suppose just to make her feel more natural. She said there was in the top drawer in this cupboard. Yes, here. And then her little shawl that always hung behind the door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters?
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
Do you think she did it?
And that, bestie, is the question. Do you think she did it? No, bestie. How about you? What do you think? I think it will be better to hear it from our dear listeners. So, listeners, besties, share us your thoughts. Give us a call and just dial 3456-789. So, for our first caller,
Hello, good afternoon. Based from the gathered information of Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, I think the story indicates that it was Mrs. Wright who murdered her own husband, who was John Wright. And that's my guess. I just want to greet my family in Zambales. Hello guys, I miss you. Thank you.
oh, bestie, that's a good point. But let's now proceed to the next part of our story. Yes, this is getting exciting. I can't wait.
Do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and her little shawl, worrying about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in a speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
I guess John Wright didn't wake when they was slipping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man.
That's just what Mr. Hale said.
Mr. Henderson said, coming out, that what was needed for the case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. It's wiped to here. Wonder how they are finding things upstairs. I hope she had it a little more red up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaking, locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house to turn against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose this. Better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
It's log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just not it.
They wonder if she's going to quilt it or not it.
Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
I don't know as there's anything so strange or taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see as it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here is the one she was working on. And look at the sewing. All the rest of it has been so nice and even. And look at this. It is all over the place. It looked as she didn't know what she was about.
Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Just pulling out a stitch or two that's not so very good. Bad sewing always made me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters?
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
What do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know she was nervous. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be through sooner than you think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper and string.
In that cupboard, maybe.
Why? Here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why? I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap. But I don't know as she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one. Or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it. Why? Look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Looks as if someone must have been robbed with it.
Why, yes.
I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale.
Mrs. Peters, I wish I had come over sometimes when she was here.
But of course, you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children.
Not having children make less work, but it makes a quiet house. And right out to work all day. And no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think we should wanted a bird. But what do you suppose went with it?
I don't know. Unless got sick and died.
She was kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if her patches are in here. And her things.
Here's some red. I expect this has got sewing these things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. Maybe her scissors are in here. There's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why? This is her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters, it is?
It's the bird.
But, Mrs. Peter, look at it! Its neck! Look at this! It's all other side too!
Somebody wrung its neck.
OMG, besties! I don't know what to say.
I'm so speechless, but I guess our dear listeners can contain their thoughts anymore. Okay, so let's hear from them right now on 13.1 Your Besties for Life.
Hello po. So, I'm gonna give my reaction about the news that Mr. John Wright is dead. Like, I was shocked by the news. So, I was amused by Mrs. Wright words lying for me, because it's very impossible for an event to happen. Your husband is being strangled by a murderer, and then you're sleeping together, you're just beside him on the bed, and then you didn't wake up. And take note, Mrs. Wright still didn't notify any personnel to rescue her husband. So she didn't call any police, ambulance, or anyone. So it's very weird. And but for me, there's also another part of the story that maybe Mrs. Wright was shook. She didn't know what to do. She can't think properly. You know, there's so many things that's going on in her mind, overthinking and everything. But hello, first things first, you have to call police or an ambulance that something happened inside your house and your husband needs medical help, needs investigation. What happened, diba? So yeah, so okay. Bye. Thank you.
Oh, I feel you too, bestie. Then, if it's not Mrs. Wright, and I believe that it's not you, bestie, and of course, it is not also me, then who killed Mr. Wright? Okay, so let's not waste our time anymore. Let's find who the killer is. Stay tuned at 13.1, your besties for life.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or not it?
We think she was going to not it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Is there a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign at all of anyone having come from the outside. Their own rope. Now let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. It would have been someone who knew just the...
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box. I wonder how it would seem never to have any children around. No, right, wouldn't like the bird a thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew, John, right?
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck and choked the life out of him. We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
If there been years and years of nothing, then a bird to sing to you. It will be awful. Still, after the bird was still, how soon do you suppose they'll be through? Looking for the evidence?
I know what stillness is. The law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster when she wore a white dress with blue ribbons and stood up there in the choir and sang. Oh, I wish I'd come over hints in a while. That was a crime! That was a crime! Who's going to punish that?
We mustn't take on.
I might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. I tell you, it's queer. Mrs. Peters, we live close together and we live far apart. We all go through the same things. It's all just a different kind of the same thing. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's alright. Take this to her. She may never know whether it was broke or not.
My, it's good thing that the man couldn't hear us. Wouldn't they just laugh? Getting all stirred up over a little thing like a dead canary. As if that could have anything to do with... Wouldn't they laugh?
Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite thing, something to show, something to make a story about, a thing that would connect up with this strange way of doing it.
Well, I've got the team around. Pretty cold out there.
I'm going to stay here a while by myself. I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied that we can do better.
Do you want to see what Mrs. Peters is doing to take in?
Oh, I guess they're not very dangerous things that ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law? Ever think of that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
I just want you to come here in a minute, George. We ought to take a look at these windows.
Oh, windows!
We'll be right out, Mr. Hale.
Well, Henry, at least we found out that she was not going to quit it. She was going to... What is it you call it, ladies?
We call it not it, Mr. Henderson.
And that's the end of our episode for today, entitled Trifles by Susan Gaspo. That's it? But who is the killer? Did I miss something? Oh wait, bestie, someone is calling us.
Hello, DJ Maris and DJ Angel. All I can perceive is women helping out each other. A feminist drama if it's appropriate to call. Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale sympathizing with Minnie, the victim's wife, understanding her possible motives. These two women, having pieced together the murder, now face the dilemma of telling the men or protecting Minnie, whom they saw as a victim. Now, their choices raises questions about many things. First, solidarity among women. Second, the meaning of justice. And lastly, the role of women in society as a source of justice. And I'm in favor of Minnie. Having a long endured deprivation, isolation, and oppression, that's what Minnie Wright reached as her breaking point when the only thing that brings beauty and joy in her stark home is destroyed. I think what these two women saw as evidences were also the same reason that it should be covered. That broken cage door signifies Mr. Wright brutally snatched the canary, like he invaded the last refuge Mrs. Wright has from the lonely life she was experiencing. At the end of the story, while Mrs. Hale and the Count Attorney was talking, all I can sense is sympathy. As women, they just put their shoes into Minnie. That is why withholding the evidences and not wanting it to turn into a system who will not just interpret it correctly is fine by me. Those days when women were powerless, them acting as the jury of peers for their own sisterhood just provoked their sense of personal and societal culpability for the crime. When Mr. Wright killed the canary, he also killed Mrs. Wright's spirit over the course of their marriage. I think that's what he deserved.
So, besties, here's another anonymous voice message who wants to share some insights about the story.
Ideal symbolism is a significant highlight for understanding the story. She writes about a woman, Mrs. Wright, who killed her husband because she blamed him for her sad life. The two characters who solved the murder, while the country attorney and sheriff thought of different strategies, the crime were Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters. Glaspell used symbolism as clues to whereas only the women were able to understand and put the pieces together. The two ladies showed that the female perspective can be just as important as the male.
Oh, seems like you're so affected with our story, bestie. To know more about our featured story for today and its author, we have here our bestie Michelle. Hi, bestie Michelle.
Oh wow, thank you for that, guys. Oh hi. So my name is Michelle and I'm going to give you a trivia about the author. So to most readers of Susan Glaspell is still known primarily as the author of Trifles, the frequently anthologized classic feminist play about two women's discovery of a wife's murder of her husband, or the short story A Jury of Her Peers, a rewriting of that piece. But Glaspell wrote over 50 short stories, 9 novels, 14 plays, and 1 biography. In 1931, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for her play Allison's House. Her novels were positively reviewed through the 1930s, and her 1939 novel, which is The Morning is Near Us, was a literary guidebook of the month choice for April 1940. It was selling more than 100,000 copies. And more about Glaspell, she had never liked to feel controlled or delimited. She was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1876. She rebelled against society's expectations and went to Drake University in Des Moines. Graduating in June of 1899, the plays and fiction of Glaspell's, it portrays a lot of feminist issues such as women's struggle for expression in a patriarchal culture, the loving yet fraught relationships between daughters and mothers, and female friendship as an essential part of a woman's growth toward autonomy and selfhood. Her plays, stories, and novels explore universal themes that continue to be vital and challenging to readers and scholars today. Themes of American identity, individuality versus social conformity, the idealism of youth, the compromises of marriage, the disillusionments of and hopes of aging. So wow, Susan Glaswell has a lot of contribution, especially in the feminism community, right guys? For listening for that short trivia, and I'll give it back to you guys.
Thank you for listening. Till our next episode, don't forget, here at 13.1, your besties for life.